Welcome to Key Concepts and Summary for Economic Principles Week 7. This week we revised the monetary and fiscal policy, and we discussed how monetary policy works and what may prevent it from working perfectly, right? Also, we focus in fiscal policy and the implications of government behavior in our national economies. So let's check a few of the important key concepts that I want to take note on this week's materials. The first one is the role of banks. As we know already, banks facilitate using money for transactions in the economy because people and firms can use bank accounts when selling or buying goods and services, when paying a worker or receiving a payment, or when saving money or receiving a loan. So, the value of these is that basically the financial capital market or in the capital market, banks are the financial intermediaries. That is, they operate between the savers who supply financial capitals and borrowers who demand loans, right? Banks run a risk of negative network if uh, the value of their assets declines. But also, banks can protect themselves against this risk by choosing to diversify their loans or to hold a greater portion of their assets in bonds and reserves. If banks hold only a fraction of their deposits as reserves, then the process of banks lending money, redepositing those loans in banks, and the banks making additional loans will create money in the economy. We have already learned that how banks create money, right? Now it's important to check the Federal Reserve banking system and central banks. The most prominent task of a central bank is basically to conduct a monetary policy, which involves changes to interest rates and credit conditions affecting the amount of borrowing and spending in an economy. Some prominent central banks around the world include, of course, the US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank for the European Union, and the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England. Now, let's talk about government spending. Fiscal policy is the set of policies that relate to federal government spending, taxation, and borrowing. And in recent decades, the level of federal government spending and taxes expressed as a share of the GDP has not changed much, typically fluctuating between 18 to 22% of GDP. However, the level of state spending in taxes as a share of GDP has risen from about 12 to 13% to about 20% of GDP over the last 4 decades. That four main account to about 70% of all federal spending. When a government spends more than it collects in taxes, it is said that they have a budget deficit. When a government collects more in taxes than it spends, it is said to have a budget surplus. If government spending and taxes are equal, it is said to have a balanced budget. The sum of all past deficits and surpluses make up the government debt. How government borrowing borrowing affects private saving. The theory of Ricardian equivalence holds that changes in private saving will offset changes in government borrowing or saving. Thus, greater private saving will offset the higher budget deficits, while greater private borrowing will offset larger budget surpluses. If the theory holds true, then changes in government borrowing or saving will have no effect on private invest in physical capital or on the trade balance. However, empirical evidence suggests that the theory holds true only partially. So that is important to note, and you should go deeper on this issue when analyzing government borrowing and especially how it affects the private saving. As we know, economic growth comes from a combination of investment in physical capital, human capital, and technology. Government borrowing can crowd out private sector investment in physical capital, but fiscal policy can also increase investment in publicly owned physical capital, human capital like education, and research and development. So, possible methods for improving education and society's investment in human capital include spending more money on teachers and other educational resources and reorganizing the education system to provide greater incentives for success. Methods for increasing research and development spending to generate new technology include direct government spending and research and development, uh, R&D, and tax incentives for businesses to conduct additional research and development.